Hey, good morning, everyone in business law. I thought I'd put up a quick video on chapter 15. Many students find this one of the more boring chapters, and I'm going to try to make it more tangible for you right off from the start. This is talking about special bailments. What's a bailment again? One party's possessing another party's property. And why do we care about it? Well, what happens if something goes wrong with it? What happens if it gets destroyed or damaged or gets somehow depreciated in value because of either the bailee, the one possessing its actions, or because of a third party or a natural event? Got to worry about these things. As a practical measure, always put in the contract. If you're the owner of the goods, you're the bailor, always put in contractual protections that either the bailee is going to be responsible for any loss, regardless of fault, or insure the goods. Insurance often is affordable. Sometimes it's not. So if it's not, try to incorporate liability standards in the written contract you have between you and the bailee. But if you can both, or you even say the bailee, yeah, you can rent, you can use these goods for a period of time, but I'm going to require you as part of the fee to insure the goods in case of destruction or damage. It's a great tool. I know when I forget rental car is a perfect example. Whenever I go in to rent a car, I'm the bailee. I'm always worried I'm going to do something, negligent. And because it's a mutual benefit bailment, we know from chapter 14, I'm going to be liable if I'm negligent unless I insure it. So although I think my car insurance may follow on a rental, I don't know all the insurance laws on that area, or I shouldn't say laws, but contractual coverages. So whenever they offer it, even though it's pretty expensive, I don't rent cars that often, but boy, when I do, I say, yeah, give me that insurance. I don't want to, you know, be what do you call it, penny wise and pound foolish. I want to make sure I have coverage. But you can mandate that. You can say, I'm not renting you this thing. I'm not going to go into a bailment situation unless you assure me protection. But chapter 15 is about the transportation of goods. I am the manufacturer of goods, so I'm going to be called the shipper. When I hear the term shipper, I'm always thinking of the party that's actually going to be carrying the goods. That's not what's their term for. They're the carrier. The shipper is the one that either owns or manufactures the goods. They have to probably have the obligation to get it to the buyer, which we call the consignee. I'm the consignor, there's a carrier, there's a consignee who's going to get the goods. What happens if things get damaged, destroyed, or lost along the way? Who eats it? Who suffers the economic loss? I always say get insurance. That way we don't have to worry about it. But can you put in the agreement who's going to bear? Yeah. And that's what we often do. We put in the contract that the manufacturer or seller of the goods is going to be responsible. It's called a destination contract. They're going to be responsible until it reaches the destination of the buyer. That's an easy one. That's the best way to do it. Just have it's called a destination contract. But a lot of contracts are shipment contracts. And what that means is if I'm the manufacturer of the seller of the goods, once I deliver it to the carrier, usually my obligations are done. Now something happens during transport, who's liable? I don't know if I'm the buyer because I'm going to say, well, the seller is. I never got it in working. It was all broken or destroyed or defunct in some way. It should be the seller. Yeah, but the seller said when it was delivered to the carrier, it was fine. So between all three parties, who's liable? Well, if it's a private carrier, there's going to be something called a bill of lading. And they're going to talk about their contractual limitations on the responsibility of the goods, whether they're damaged or lost during the process. Private carriers are like UPS and FedEx. That's going to be a contract that you deal with. And you have to be very cautious whether you're the shipper of the goods or you're the recipient of the goods. You want to make sure there's an understanding of who's going to bear responsibility if it doesn't come in the way it's supposed to. What the book is really going to concentrate are common carriers, basically the United States Post Office. Certain train shipments are considered to be public carriers. Basically, they take all, as long as they have the facilities for them, they take all who apply and they don't discriminate against anybody. They don't say, well, this is unprofitable. They have to carry the goods as long as they have the ability to do so. And the fees are quasi often set by the government, and it's often in the bill of lading. Think about if you take an airline trip and you have checked luggage. Your checked luggage is a type of shipment. And how much liability they're going to bear is right on that ticket they put on there. They're only liable for so much money if things are lost or stolen or damaged during transport, which frustrates a lot of people. But the government actually allows these common carriers to reduce their liability. Otherwise, the businesses would go bankrupt with claims of all kinds of things being stolen or lost, some of them true and some of them not. So to avoid that, they limit, unless you buy insurance, what will be lost or damage. But liability of common carriers, what are common carriers again? Those types of carriers of goods or people who don't discriminate in terms of service for, I only do profitable, I only do for certain kinds of companies. No, all who apply as long as you meet my fee standard that the government has approved. You're an insurer of the goods. Those common carriers, once they get a hold of the goods, anything that goes wrong, they are the financial bearer of the burden, unless the government has limited their ability to reduce that loss. And there are some exceptions. So what are the exceptions? That's what basically this chapter is about, the exceptions for liability for common carriers of goods. One is an act of God. The United States Postal Service, a tornado comes through the community, whips up the truck. Let's hope the driver's fine, but the package in the truck gets damaged because the truck got flipped over. There, the carrier would not be liable. It's called an act of God. It's got to be unpredictable, though. Like, what if we expected a lot of flash flooding today in my area and the post office was going through it, knowing they should maybe wait a day? Well, now they've taken great risk. But it's one of these unforeseen, when you thought act of God, the term itself sort of implies it's got to be kind of a freak of nature type thing, earthquake, tornado, flash flooding that wasn't expected, things like that. Act of a public authority. So I'm shipping goods, and the government might seize those oranges I'm sending off to my friend because there's a contaminant bug, fruit fly or something like that they're trying to keep out of a certain region of the country, and the government seizes those goods. Clearly, the carrier is not responsible there because the government interceded. The next one is the inherent nature of the goods. Sometimes, I know this is a little depressing, those of you like cows. I like cows for some reason. When you ship cattle, there's actually an expectation that a certain percentage of them won't make the trip for whatever reason. They're not all going to make it. That's not necessarily the fault of the carrier. So the inherent nature of the goods, there's sometimes an expectation that some of the animals will perish along the trip. The same with certain kinds of goods. I always think of what are the flowers that we used to, not that I went to the prom, but there's a flower, you get orchids, right? You get orchids on the prom. I think it's the orchid. Those flowers can just a slight the air quality, something could give way, and orchids can sometimes die in transport, and it's not necessarily the carrier's fault. So if we don't know why it happened, the carrier did all the reasonable mechanisms of carrying orchids from one point to the other, and 7% of the plants perish during the trip. That might be because of the inherent nature of the goods. Some goods are just volatile; they don't stay. It's kind of a rare exception, but it does come up. Act of the shipper. This is more important. I collect political memorabilia, and I was in this weird kick for a while where I was getting these memorial plates. They were so cheap on eBay, with different presidents in the middle of the plate. It looks like a dinner plate. I guess you hang them on the wall. I was actually going to use them to eat off of. I guess you're not supposed to. I don't know what I was thinking. I was ordering these things, but they were cheap. I was going to $3 or $4 a piece. And I ordered one. I was a winning bidder on eBay for like $3, and then they shipped it to me. And I used to have a PO box. I still have the PO box, but I used to get the stuff in the PO box, and I had a big one. And I go in there, and there's a big envelope. And I said, "Oh, what's this?" And I remember picking up. Well, all I can hear is that noise of clanking of shards of ceramic plate. Obviously, it fell apart. This person mailed it to me in an envelope with absolutely no packaging whatsoever. And I remember opening it up. That was only $3 or $4. Like I said, it didn't cost me much. I think I had to pay for shipping, though. It was a little bit more. And I can remember saying, "What the hell is it?" And I pull it out, and there's one big shard, and there was Lyndon Johnson's picture on it. And who's to blame? Is it the post office to blame? No, it's a plate. You have to package a plate with a certain degree of care. There wasn't even a newspaper wrapped around the thing. It was just put in a big, 11 by 17 type of envelope, and it was destroyed. It was a good laugh for me. And obviously I couldn't go after the carrier, the post office, because they exercised reasonable care, and there was an act of the shipper. They didn't package things appropriately. And I've had other things like that too. You order a poster and they don't put it in a poster tube. I don't know what they're thinking. They try to put it in some kind, they fold it thinking that's a good idea, and then you get this huge couple of creases in the poster, and to me it loses its value. And I can't go after the Postal Service for wrecking it because it wasn't their fault. It was the fault of the shipper. You kind of almost know when you see it. The other one is act of a public enemy. This one's a very difficult one because it's not about criminal hijackers or thieves or bandits of the like. It's really got to be an enemy that were declared. We haven't declared war since World War II. So, I mean, I guess you could argue if, Al Qaeda or some other terrorist group attacked your shipment for some reason, the carrier should be left off the hook because it was an act of a terrorist organization. Those don't come up too much, but you can see the argument there, though, right? The carrier shouldn't be liable. How long? So it's a public carrier. I drop off the goods. If it's a shipment contract, I'm done. I shipped them appropriately, I packaged them appropriately. Now the carrier is going to be on the hook. How long is the carrier on the hook? Only really during transportation. But there's a little window there at the end when they drop them off at, say, the buyer is a warehouse, it's a company, and you drop them off, or it's at a train depot or at a trucking depot, and the buyer's expected to get them. There's a little window there that they have to be given time to get them, and I don't know what that is. It's kind of determined by each contextual situation. But once that reasonable period of time expires, it now just turns into a mutual benefit bailment situation, and the carrier is only responsible for negligence, and they're no longer an insurer of the goods. And it seems reasonable. Okay, I shipped them out. They're at the train depot where we drop off the goods. The buyer, has, I don't know, a day. Next day they don't come. Am I still bearing some responsibility? Yeah, but it's reduced down to just reasonable care. Sober overhang, it's packaged appropriately, and then somebody comes and steals it 3 or 4 days later by hopping a fence and cutting through the wire. Now the consignee, the buyer, is going to bear the risk of loss because the carrier was reasonable in the way they stored the goods for waiting for the buyer to get them. I always think of this like this happened to me kind of in a situation. I went to Walmart. I'm the buyer of the goods, and I used to have a Prius. If you know what a Prius is, it was a very small car. And it was the first time I bought a big TV. My kids were all excited, and crazy. It wasn't that big a TV, but the packaging made it big. And the Prius is actually fairly roomy when you get into it for people, but I couldn't get the TV in the car. So I bought the TV, and this goes back really to chapter 14 more in a classic bailment. I wheeled it back in on the thing. I said, I bought this thing. Here's my receipt. I said, I don't want to return it. I just have to go get my buddy's vehicle to come and get this thing. Can I leave it here? And they said, sure. What kind of bailment is that? Some might argue it's mutual benefit because I bought the TV from the developing goodwill. They do get. I think there's a better argument that it's for the sole benefit of me as the bailor. What degree of care do they owe in that circumstance? Slight. I came back. It was still there. They did a fine job. They put it behind, I think, a layaway counter, so it was great. But you can think about that. Like if the goods were dropped off, maybe not at Walmart, but at some location, and then Walmart drivers have to go from that location to bring them over. How much time do they have to get them? It's a question of fact, and jurors determine whether or not it was still in that insurance stage where the carrier is liable no matter what, or did it get reduced to now a mutual benefit bailment. Boring chapter. Bill of lading, there's an example in your book. This is basically between the contract between the shipper, the one that's sending it, and the carrier for what the goods are, the liability of it, and all that kind of stuff. That's why if you're a carrier, if you ever get in this business, you've got to be very careful and inspect the goods to make sure they're packaged appropriately, because you might become liable if you can't establish that the shipper packed them inappropriately. But if you can catch it right at the inception, I'm not taking these goods, they're not packed appropriately, and they're likely to be damaged during transport, and I don't want to take that risk. And again, always write up a contract to protect yourself anyways. The contractual terms apply. Although common carriers can't write contracts unless they get consent of the government because they're considered quasi-monopolistic. People, baggage, hotel keepers. No one cares about the hotel keepers. Hotel keepers do have a heightened duty by law, but every jurisdiction I know puts a provision in that as long as the hotel keeper provides a safe either behind the counter or in the room, and puts a notice on that they limit their liability to a very small amount. I forgot what it is, but if you ever been into a hotel room, that notice on the back of the door, maybe on the slip that you had to sign when you agreed to rent the room, and your goods are stolen in the meantime, that high degree of care was reduced contractually by them posting conspicuously in many different places. And maybe the best one is, I think if I was a hotel keeper, not only would I put it in the back of the door, I'd have them sign it when they came in. And you can't say as a defense, well, I didn't read it, I just signed it. Well, it was in bold print that they waive, you waive any liability for goods that you don't keep in the safe and you didn't keep in the safe. Not that big on hotel. They do have a very heightened degree of care, though, to take care of their patrons. It's consistent, though, with negligence. So, and I've had some involvement, or know some people with involvement on negligent security cases where someone got injured as a result of an attack. Someone's gotten a hotel, and the argument was they didn't have enough security in the way the doors open or close to the outside of the hotel. And there is the jury had to be told that a hotel does have a heightened degree of care to care for the patrons in the hotel. And what's a hotel? Somebody that's staying over in a transient way. They don't have to be traveling. I could stay in a hotel right in Sturbridge. I've done it before. My kids back in the day, we stayed for like 3 days during the February break because I had a pool and they were supposed to have like some party activities. It wasn't that great, but I'm not really transient. I'm not traveling over, but I mean, I'm intending to stay overnight. It's not that I'm visiting just the restaurant. I'm staying overnight. That's the test for when you define somebody as a hotel guest. They don't have to serve all who apply. They have to serve all who apply who they can accommodate. So if someone's drunk and intoxicated and unruly, they have a right to refuse service. The hotel does, even though they're licensed. To protect their person, desk property. Again, they're liable strictly just like a common carrier unless they post conspicuously that waiver of liability and or have you sign it. And they have to still provide a safe, though, by statute. They have to provide some kind of mechanism by which you can protect your goods. That's the main thing I want you to get out of this chapter. Kept it somewhat short, I hope. I think it's personally kind of a dry chapter, but we're into a whole new section now about sales, which is the heart and soul of most contracts. Are usually, there are also service contracts. I shouldn't say that, but it's a significant area of business law. Our sales contracts, and I'll start up a video shortly on that one.